She had no way of knowing that at that very moment, an IT team was at the Baring home in Colorado Springs setting up a large screen TV that would allow them to connect and watch their daughter. They said they heard Myka speak plenty of times, but Helena insisted. "It's not the content you need to understand, Mr. and Mrs. Baring," Helena explained. "It's the fact that your daughter's hard work has earned her a spot on this prestigious agenda." They relented because they already knew their daughter's fiancé wouldn't take no for an answer. "She's pretty stubborn," Warren Baring complained more than once, as cables were adeptly installed. Back in New York, employees were coming into the auditorium that would soon broadcast Myka's speech. Myka's assistant, Millie, whose culinary skills were second only to her administrative ones, supplied dessert for the gathering. There were small baked pastries with fruit fillings, which she playfully labeled fruit torts. Then there were baked cookies in the shape of boxer shorts labeled briefs, and dozens of cupcakes with the Scale of Justice logo on them. The legal-themed pastries in honor of her boss were a big hit. The amphitheater was packed with employees talking and checking to see who had the closest bet so far for the new administrative assistant's length of employment. She had made it to lunchtime, it seemed, and the pool was getting smaller. "Watch this," Claudia nudged her girlfriend and newly promoted director, Eileen Sullivan, as they approached the table with the goodies on them. "These are delicious," Sui Generous said to the woman who had spent all night baking. "Why, thank you very much," said Millie, and offered him a napkin. "Would you like another?" The man gladly accepted. "I think Millie's in love," Claudia smiled as she watched the exchange. "Miss Donovan, everything all right?" Helena asked, observing the interaction. "Yep," Claudia said as she looked down at her iPhone. "Good," Helena said, smiled at everyone, and went to the front of the room and took her seat. As soon as it was time, the connection was initiated, and the ballroom at the Ritz in Los Angeles appeared. Helena looked down at her phone and texted, "I love you," to Myka. Myka felt her phone vibrate and looked down to see the message from Helena. The smile came across Myka's face until her name was announced, and the applause in the ballroom was second only to the crowd back in New York, who were cheering on their Chief Counsel. The introduction was made, and Myka took the stage and began her talk. She was going to tell the crowd of 1,000 plus that workplace transparency is not a detriment to a company, but a benefit. Her talk would include suggestions for CEOs to remove the glass ceilings and instead have a glass door, a statement her boss was going to misinterpret. An hour later, Myka closed with, "Even at Wells Corp, where many of our ideas cannot be made public until the end result, our corporate due diligence is an open book. Our staff members know what we are doing. Our investors are kept up to date on our progress, and the doors to many of our top executives are always open. It is time for us to reshape the corporate model to include disclosure as part of our dialogue," Myka concluded. Her fellow participants applauded, as did the people in the Wells Corp room, all except Helena, who sat there in her private reverie as she stared at the image of the woman who was in her every thought. Myka thanked her host and the other guests and took her seat. A short while later, as lunch was being served, and after accepting congratulations from her fellow attorneys, Myka went outside to call Helena. Helena was back in her office now, and her entire body melted into the excitement she felt when talking to her favorite Chief Counsel. "You were wonderful," Helena said, and Myka thanked her. "I miss you so much," Myka said, as she smiled at people passing who gave her the thumbs-up sign. "When will you be home?" Helena asked, even though she knew. "Tomorrow night about 9 o'clock, Myka said. "I can meet you at the airport," Helena offered again. But Myka knew tomorrow night was the last of Helena's obligatory dinners with the mayor. Let's just meet at home. Then we could be done with our schedules and just be together, Myka said in a tone that made Helena bow her head and smile. Remember, the longer the wait, the sweeter the kiss, Myka said, and heard Helena let out a soft gasp. She couldn't wait for that kiss. I will be waiting, Helena said, and they hung up. Helena twirled around in her leather chair, almost giddy at the thought of Myka's return. Myka's eyes were glossed over as she bit her bottom lip and thought about tomorrow night. People were stopping to say how much they enjoyed her talk and brought Myka back from her musings. Excellent job, Miss Baring, came a familiar voice, but Myka couldn't place him at first. I see being hard on you paid off. Myka looked and realized it was the man whose lecture in law school she had just reflected on that very morning. Professor Calvert, Myka said, and didn't know whether to shake his hand or hug him. He made the decision and pulled her in for a warm embrace. Great job, Myka. I have heard wonderful things about you, and I'm happy to see they're all true, he said sincerely. What are you doing here? Myka asked of the professor who taught in Colorado. I came here to see you, the man said, walking her over to the leather bench by the window. I'm teaching at a law school back east now, he said, as they sat down next to one another. You're teaching back east, and you came out west to talk to me? Myka said, laughing. I thought it might be a good idea to speak to you alone, the man said. Professor Calvert, I spend a lot of time in my office in New York alone, she quickly pointed out, and he laughed. Myka, I wanted to talk to you when you were away from your job in New York, he said, and his expression became more serious. Professor Calvert, what could you possibly want to talk to me about that you needed me to be 3,000 miles away from my office? Myka asked, perplexed. She was beginning to suspect it wasn't her geographic location that was the issue. We want you to come teach at Columbia Law School, the 60-year-old man in the jacket with patches on the elbow said. His statement made Myka pull back and sit up straight in her place. Teach? At one of the most prestigious law schools? Professor, she started to say, but he interrupted her and asked her to call him Mike. Myka, I know you enjoy your job at Wells Corp, but you have talent and, more importantly, passion. I still see that in you. You need to share that with people, not in boardrooms, but in a classroom with some of the brightest young minds, he implored. Think about where you can make the most impact, Myka. Making sure that corporate ledgers are transparent? Or sharing your desire with the next generation of lawyers, he asked, fervently. Myka listened and felt a flurry of mixed emotions arise inside her. Had he just reduced her entire speech on corporate transparency and deemed it unworthy? Mike, thank you. I am honored, but I love my job at Wells Corp. I really do, Myka said. He cast his eyes down. I'm sure you do, Myka. I'm sure there's a lot of glamour in it. But promise me you'll think about it. You would be one of our youngest professors on staff. They don't invite just anyone, Myka, he said. I'm honored, Professor, really, but... Myka tried again. Glamour, she said out loud, trying not to be insulted. Did he think she was doing this for the glamour? Think about it, he asked again, as he stood up and took Myka's hand in his. I'll be in touch when you're back in New York. Myka couldn't get home to Helena fast enough.